guys, Jerry, the poor historian, bringing you part 2 of my review of the Hanwei Hutton training Saber. And as you can see, I've made lots of changes to it, but we'll go over those shortly. Part 1 of these reviews is where I usually give my first review, or my first impression, my thoughts on how the product might work. And then part 2 comes after I've had enough time to familiarize myself with it, training and sparring, and going to events with it, and learning a little bit about how the product works. So I actually have had plenty of time since I made my first video, my part 1 video of the review, because I lost the raw footage. It's out there in the ether in one of the clouds somewhere, so I'm going to have to dig through that, see if I can find it. But part 2 comes with a lot of information. I've had it at events, I've had it at sparring meetups, and the largest event that I brought it to was the Michigan Sparbecue, which went on in August in Lansing, hosted by the Michigan HEMA Association. Shout out to those guys. We've got a lot of stuff going on in our state, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. So, this Saber review is actually funny because I think there's probably maybe 4 or 5 people in the entire state who actually train with the Saber. So a lot of my experience with this guy comes from fighting against rapiers, which usually have a good 6 to 8 inches in reach on me. So I still got to use some of the techniques, but getting stabbed in the face when I'm trying to do a moulinet just doesn't feel the best. So, nonetheless, I have some good reviews for it. First and foremost, you can see that I've made a lot of changes to it. One of them is the arrow blunt wrapped in gaff tape around the top. That is for safety because the Hanwei Hutton does not have any sort of rounded tip or wedge tip or anything like that. It's literally just a rounded end with the same thickness as the rest of it, and it's actually fairly thin. So we wanted to make a little bit of extra protection on there. You can get these tips for about, well, I think it was 12 of them for $4, and then we actually threw a nut in there, one of the like a nuts and bolts, so that it doesn't break through. And then the gaff tape is about $5 for a roll, more or less. So in any case, a little extra protection never hurt. But the big change that you've all seen is this. So I'm teaching a Saber class based on the manuals used during the American Civil War. You all know it. I love the American Civil War. So I just had to modify this, especially because the guard that came with the Hanwei Hutton was just ridiculous. When I was fighting with it, well, first, the most ridiculous part was the guard itself. It was immensely thin metal. It felt like tin or aluminum or something. I know that lots of people have told me that the more modern versions have thickened it up a bit. I'm still not certain about that. I did have a Hanwei Hutton at the Michigan Sparbecue that I could identify by the sight compared to a similar product like the Cold Steel Training Saber, because the guard was so dinged up and bent out of shape. The guy who owned it said that he had to hammer it back into shape after using it quite a lot. So that just goes to show how thin those guards are. Not necessarily going to break or become a safety hazard, it's just annoying. The other part of the original guard is that it was so thin that I kept, when I grabbed it, and I've got large hands, but yeah, I would assume the same thing would go for people with smaller hands, is that when I would grip it, my hand would cramp because I just simply couldn't get a strong enough grip on it to do the techniques properly. And I know that you can probably wrap some tape around it. Common things are, for example, tennis racket tape, which adds a lot of bulk for not a lot of length, which is nice and a good grip. But I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to buy my swords to modify my swords, which I already did over here too. So lots of things with that. In the end of the day, I had this really poor quality, supposedly Civil War era Indian replica, not associated with any particular popular factory or maker, just I had it laying around. So fortunately, I was able to combine the odd trend in HEMA weapons not having a peened ting, but instead having a nut holding it on. Same with the low quality Indian replicas, and I was able to take off the grip from this one and put it on the Hanwei Hutton Saber. So now I have a Civil War Saber, more or less, for practice, for training. So very nice. I know a lot of people are worried about the Hanwei Hutton bending. You know that steel training swords need to bend properly, otherwise it could be dangerous. This one bends quite easily. Maybe not as much as a full-made fetter, but it does spring back into shape fairly nicely. It doesn't hold a bend, which is good. I actually like that. I was sparring with someone. I'll probably post the video if I can find it. Sparring with one of the members of my group. He had a rapier. I had a saber. Probably the only way I could get around his sword was going in for a lunge. And I got him right in the neck area, and boy, that thing has a nice bend to it.
Nice. There it is.
Woo! Probably hurt him a bit, so I'm sorry about that. But it does prove the point that these guys do flex decently well. It has a very solid flex. It flexes a lot more force I have to put into it than my Fetter. But nonetheless, it does flex, which is nice. It does also take a few dings in it if you're sparring against metal, so just take yourself a file and file those away like you would any steel saber. At the end of the day, this is a little short for me. Of course, the guard is horrible. I don't recommend the guard at all. But the blade itself is also a little short as well. Let's see, I have a replica Civil War Union officer's sword here. Probably the closest thing to an infantry saber that I have here. And if you compare it in length, it's comparable. Let me see if you can get it all on screen there. It's comparable in length. It's still a little bit shorter. And then if you compare it to... Make sure these things don't fall down behind me. If you compare it to this one, which is actually an original late 19th century, possibly, for lack of a better term, gymnasium saber. I know that's not the period term, but this is one that was specifically made for sparring with a saber. You can see that it is significantly longer than the Hanwei Hutton. So I'm not sure what the details are on that. I'm not sure whether a shorter blade or a longer blade is more conducive for one or another training manual. But it's just something that I wish the Hanwei Hutton had, that I'm sure some of the more popular makers would be able to provide, that this one just doesn't. I'm getting some more higher quality sabers shortly. We'll be getting reviews of them soon. But at the end of the day, I am the poor historian, and I do want to encourage HEMA to be affordable for everybody who wants to use it. And the Hanwei Hutton is probably the best deal. It is the lowest cost steel saber that is out on the market at the moment. The next highest one is the cold steel training saber, which I've only had limited opportunity to spar with. The only thing that I noticed about that one compared to the Hanwei Hutton is that the guard on the cold steel is thick. It looks solid. I was fine with it. But other than that, the two of them are essentially recreating the same sword, the same historical sword. So at the end of the day, this is not a bad sword. If you're okay with modifying it, or if you've got little hands, or you want to wrap some tape around the guard, this is fine. Get the Hanwei Hutton. If you have some poor quality replicas lying around. I do want to clarify with this guard, it didn't fit the blade perfectly, so I did have to throw a nail in there. Kind of see it, and there's a little bit of tape in there that I wedged in place. Those two have not come out at all. Perfectly safe, and it does hold it in place very well. The guards probably should be replaced with something a little better at some point, but for now, it holds its place in the blade, and it works very well for sparring. One final bit here, a little secret. I'm going to show you what I'm doing with the original handle of the Hanwei Hutton. I got myself a little bit of the nylon plastic, and I cut it in the relative shape of a saber, and I attached the Hanwei Hutton handle to it. And it's horrible. It's really bad. Firstly, it flexes too much. I can't guard at all. I always have to dodge with this. And then also attaching it, you can kind of see through it. There's just one rod that goes about that far into the blade, and it just twists like crazy. In fact, you can kind of bloop, 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 and it twists with the nut. So I'm still trying to figure out something to do with the guard. It still looks cool as a guard, and it's still solid. It just doesn't have that nice thick feel to it. I'll figure something out. I don't want to have to modify it, but at the end of the day, I might have to just drill a couple extra holes in it. We'll find out. Like I said, I don't like this. Probably the worst part of the Hanwei Hutton Saber. The blade itself is great, especially if you want to replace it with a much more aesthetic or historical guard. That's it for now. Have a good day, guys.